fund.
Okay.
Let's talk markets. We got CPI report today. This is a great chart from Bespoke that I think I think I knew this. Inflation had been falling year over year, but I didn't realize that it was like really an outlier in terms of the consecutive number of months where the year over year reading was lower than the previous month.
It's a full year.
It's 12 months. Pretty wild. It ended today, but pretty unbelievable. Bob, you tweeted today, maybe a good jumping off point for this. Elevated inflation will persist as long as nominal wage growth significantly outpaces productivity growth. Wage growth data today shows 5 to 6% wage growth on a matched basis among those with the highest propensity to spend, too high for inflation to durably fall to target.
Well, that's pretty boring, isn't it?
Unpack this
Look
for
at
us.
this engagement, though. Look at this.
But Bob, what do you define as elevated? Like, do you think 3% is elevated? Or
well, I think the Fed's target's 2.
So anything above that,
anything above that, they have room to move to 2.5 and stuff like that. But like, look, the Fed needs to make sure that inflation is not 3, 4, or 5.
Because the thing, if you look at, I got data going back to 1914, and you could see, I don't sort of know it up there, but back in the 20s and 30s, the historical long-term average over 110 years is 3.3.
Right.
So that's like so why do people think that 3% is so high?
But because at 3%, you start to get the trouble with 3%. And the trouble with moving above 3% is that you start to get 2 main problems, which is one, it increases the volatility of inflation, which increases the uncertainty about forward investment and reduces long-term productivity, right? Medium-term productivity, which is really what the Fed's focused on. That's why the inflation mandate's
So you think if it's above 3, it's harder to control the volatility of it?
It is harder to control the volatility.
But why does that, can you unpack how that impacts productivity?
Well, because a critical component of long-term investment is having a good sense of what your cash flows.
Can you define productivity for the audience?
Yeah, productivity. It's basically, investment that creates a certain amount of output per, unit of a person's time.
Yeah.
Right. And so that means factories, that means, roads, that means intellectual property, all sorts of stuff. And in order to figure out, look, there's like tens of thousands of these analysts sitting around in their spreadsheets figuring out, like, here's what the cash flow is I'm going to spend, my RRR, I'm going to spend $1 million today, and here's what my cash flows are going to be in the future. Well, it's a whole different story if you don't really know what the cash flows are going to be in the future, if there's volatility there.
Right. If it was 5% forever, we'd be fine with that.
If it was 5% and certain to be 5% forever, then we'd be fine with it. The problem is that when you move from a volatility around 1.5 to 2.5, to say 3, well, 3 can become 5 or 6 or 7.
The uncertainty.
And that uncertainty is what creates the harm to the economy, the long-term drag on productive.
You can't budget. You can't figure out what to pay people.
Right.
You almost could become frozen stiff. Like, I'm not investing in, name it, CapEx, inventory, whatever, until I feel better about what's going on.
Essentially what happens is the risk premium of all projects rises, which means projects that would have otherwise made a lot of sense in a low, stable inflation environment, now
they look riskier.
Right? Because you have to factor in that. So your cost of capital, your hurdle rate, all of that stuff goes up. That means that you're doing less investment, which means that the economy is less productive.
But isn't nominal wage growth, John, chart back on, please. Isn't nominal wage growth coming down, maybe not as quickly as you would like it to or the Fed would like it to?
Well, take a look at that chart. Like, has it come down? Yeah, it's not at 6.5.
This is median wage growth, smooth 3-month average.
It's still pretty. So it's still well above. So this is what, 5.5%?
5.5%. And this is the Atlanta Fed wage tracker. There's a bunch of different things.
Dude, median wage growth 5.5% is disruptive.